The crystalline artifact hung suspended in the observation chamber like a frozen scream, its faceted surface refracting the sterile laboratory lights into patterns that hurt to look at directly. Kalen Thorne pressed his palm against the reinforced viewing window, his breath fogging the transparent aluminum as he studied the object that had already claimed 3 research teams and driven 2 xenoarchaeologists to madness. "Still talking to you, is it?" Zephyra Voss asked from behind him, her voice carrying that particular blend of concern and scientific fascination that had made her the finest quantum engineer in the Terran Exploration Corps. Her silver hair caught the ambient light as she moved to stand beside him, her augmented eyes automatically adjusting their aperture to filter the artifact's unsettling luminescence. Kalen nodded slowly, never taking his gaze from the crystal. "It's not talking exactly. It's more like singing. A melody that exists in dimensions our brains aren't equipped to process." He finally turned away from the window, rubbing his temples where a familiar ache had begun to build. "The Velnathi brought this to us because even their 1,000-year-old minds couldn't comprehend it. What makes us think we can succeed where they failed?" Zephyra's laugh was sharp but not unkind. "Because we're human, Kay. We're the species that looked at fire and decided to capture it, that saw the ocean and built boats to cross it. The Velnathi, for all their wisdom, think in patterns established over millennia. We think in chaos." She gestured toward the artifact with her cybernetic arm, its chrome surface reflecting the crystal's impossible geometries. "Sometimes chaos is exactly what you need to solve an ancient puzzle." The door to the observation deck hissed open, admitting Commander Lysander Cross, whose weathered face bore the weight of leading humanity's first deep space archaeological mission. His steel-gray eyes moved between Kalen and Zephyra before settling on the artifact beyond the window. "The Galactic Council is growing impatient. They want answers about what this thing is and why it's been dormant for the past 2 million years. 2 million years, Kalen repeated, the number rolling off his tongue like a prayer. The Velnathi records indicated appeared simultaneously in 7 different star systems, each one marking the sudden disappearance of an entire spacefaring civilization. No bodies, no debris, no trace of where they went. Just these crystals, singing their impossible songs." Zephyra moved to her workstation, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as she called up the latest scan results. "The energy readings are unlike anything in our databases. It's not fusion, not antimatter, not even zero-point energy. It's something that operates outside our understanding of physics entirely." She paused, her augmented eyes widening as new data streamed across her displays. "Kay, you need to see this." Kalen joined her at the workstation, his heart rate spiking as he absorbed the implications of what she'd discovered. The artifact's energy signature was fluctuating in response to their presence, specifically to the electromagnetic patterns generated by human neural activity. "It's not just singing," he whispered. "It's trying to harmonize with us." Commander Cross stepped closer, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma pistol at his hip. "Harmonize how? Are we talking about some kind of alien influence?" "No," Zephyra said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's the opposite. The artifact isn't trying to change us. It's trying to understand us. The quantum fluctuations suggest it's been waiting, learning from every species that's encountered it, but never finding the right resonance frequency." She looked up at Kalen, her eyes bright with possibility. "Until now." The implications hung in the air like a charge before a lightning strike. Kalen felt the familiar weight of discovery pressing against his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced as a child when he'd first held a fossil in his hands and realized he was touching something that had existed millions of years before his birth. But this was different. This wasn't just about the past, it was about a future that none of them could yet imagine. "We need to make direct contact," Kalen said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Physical contact with the artifact itself." Commander Cross shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. The safety protocols exist for a reason. We've already lost too many good people to this thing. They weren't the right people, Zephyra interjected softly. The Velnathi approach everything through logic and predetermined patterns. The Zekthari use pure instinct. The Mordun rely on collective consciousness. But humans. She gestured toward the artifact again. We use curiosity. We see a locked door and our first instinct isn't to analyze the lock or break down the door. We wonder what's on the other side. Kalen moved back to the observation window, placing both hands against the surface as he studied the crystal's ever-shifting patterns. Somewhere in those impossible geometries lay the answer to a mystery that had puzzled the galaxy for millennia. The artifact had been waiting, patient as a stone, for a species with the right combination of intelligence and reckless curiosity to unlock its secrets. Schedule the contact protocol for tomorrow, he said without turning around. Whatever this thing is, whatever it's been waiting for, I think it's time we gave it what it wants. Behind him, he heard Commander Cross begin to protest, but Zephyra's voice cut through the objection with quiet authority. He's right, Lysander. We didn't come this far to observe from a safe distance. Sometimes the greatest discoveries require the greatest risks. The containment chamber felt larger than its actual dimensions as Kalen stood before the entry portal, the biosuit's environmental systems humming quietly around him. Through the reinforced viewing ports, he could see Zephyra at her control station, her fingers hovering over emergency protocols that could flood the chamber with neural dampening fields in less than 3 seconds. Commander Cross paced behind her like a caged predator, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. Biometric readings are stable, Zephyra announced through the comm system. Neural activity shows expected elevation but nothing approaching the danger threshold. You're cleared for entry, K. The portal dilated with a soft hiss, and Kalen stepped into the chamber where the artifact waited. Up close, its song was different, more complex. What had seemed like a single melody from the observation deck revealed itself as a symphony of interwoven harmonies, each strand vibrating through frequencies that touched something deeper than hearing. The crystal itself was larger than he'd expected, standing nearly 2 meters tall and pulsing with an inner light that seemed to breathe in rhythm with his heartbeat. Initial contact in 30 seconds, he reported, removing the insulated gloves from his hands. The biosuit's tactile sensors would provide some protection, but he knew instinctively that meaningful contact required skin against the artifact's surface. If something goes wrong, initiate lockdown immediately. Don't wait for my signal. Understood, Commander Cross replied, though his voice carried the weight of someone preparing to make an impossible choice. K, if this thing tries to take you somewhere, you fight it. You hear me? You fight it and you come back. Kalen smiled despite the gravity of the moment. I'll do my best, old friend. He reached toward the crystal, his hand trembling slightly as it approached the faceted surface. The artifact's song grew louder, more insistent, as though recognizing the significance of what was about to happen. The moment his fingertips touched the crystal, reality shattered. Kalen found himself standing not in the containment chamber but in a vast space that might have been a room or might have been a universe. Geometric patterns flowed around him like living things, their surfaces reflecting not light but pure concept, pure meaning. The song of the artifact had become a voice, and that voice was speaking in languages that had been forgotten before his species learned to make fire. Welcome, child of Terra, the voice said, and though the words came in sounds he'd never heard, their meaning bloomed directly in his consciousness. We have waited so long for your kind to find us. Who are you? Kalen asked, surprised to find that he could speak in this impossible space. What happened to the civilizations that found you before? The space around him shifted, and suddenly he was witnessing scenes from across galactic history. Entire worlds filled with beings of impossible beauty and terrible alien intelligence, all of them reaching toward crystalline artifacts identical to the one he'd touched. But as they made contact, something was wrong. Their faces showed not wonder but confusion, then fear, then nothing at all as they simply stopped. They were not ready, the voice explained with what might have been sadness. Each species that found us was perfect in their own way. The Velnathi with their patient wisdom, the Zekthari with their perfect instincts, the Mordun with their collective harmony. But perfection, child of Terra, is the enemy of discovery. Perfection looks at the unknown and seeks to catalog it, to reduce it to known quantities. The scenes shifted again, and Kalen saw his own species as the voice saw them. Humans climbing mountains because they were there, diving into oceans to see what lay beneath, reaching toward stars with primitive rockets built from salvaged materials and boundless determination. He saw the qualities that other species considered flaws: recklessness, inconsistency, the inability to accept that some things were impossible. You alone among all the species we have encountered possess the trait we require, the voice continued. You see the unknown not as a problem to be solved but as an adventure to be experienced. You embrace chaos not as failure but as possibility. Require for what? Kalen asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. The space around him expanded to show the galaxy itself, but not as he knew it. This was the galaxy as it truly was, mapped not in terms of stars and planets but in currents of possibility, streams of potential that flowed between worlds like rivers of light. And at the center of it all, something vast and dark was stirring, something that had been sleeping for millions of years but was now beginning to wake. The Devourer's return, the voice said simply. The force that consumed the first civilization, that drove us to scatter our seeds across the galaxy in the hope that someday, someone would find them and prove worthy. They consume not matter or energy but possibility itself, leaving behind universes where nothing new can ever happen. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. And you think humans can stop them? We think humans can do what no other species has done, the voice replied. We think you can change the rules of the game entirely. The space began to contract around him, and Kalen realized he was being pulled back toward his own reality. But before the vision faded completely, the voice spoke one final time, and its words carried the weight of cosmic destiny. The artifact will teach you, child of Terra. It will show you secrets that predate your sun. But remember this: knowledge without wisdom is the path to extinction, and wisdom without courage is the path to slavery. Your species has never lacked for courage. See that you do not fail in wisdom. Kalen gasped as consciousness returned to the containment chamber. He was lying on the floor, his hand still touching the crystal, which now pulsed with a warm golden light. Through the viewing ports, he could see Zephyra and Commander Cross rushing toward the entry portal, their faces painted with concern and relief. But it was what he couldn't see that filled him with equal measures of hope and terror. Behind his eyes, new knowledge burned like captured starlight, and with it came the understanding that humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. The medical bay's diagnostic scanners hummed around Kalen as Dr. Meridian Blake reviewed the seemingly impossible readings on her holographic displays. Her dark eyes, enhanced with quantum processing implants, tracked the data streams with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces belonged to different realities. Your neural patterns have changed, she announced, her voice carrying the clinical precision that had made her the most respected xenobiologist in the sector. The synaptic pathways show modifications that shouldn't be possible without surgical intervention, and your brain is processing information at rates that exceed normal human parameters by a factor of 12. Kalen sat on the examination table, still feeling the residual warmth where the artifact's knowledge had settled into his consciousness like sediment in still water. I can feel it, he said quietly. Not just the information, but the way it connects to everything else. I understand principles of physics that our species hasn't even theorized yet. Zephyra leaned against the wall, her augmented arms crossed as she studied her friend with a mixture of fascination and concern. The quantum fluctuations around you have increased exponentially. You're generating energy signatures that read like a small fusion reactor, but contained entirely within biological parameters. Whatever that thing did to you, it's rewritten your basic operating system. Show us, Commander Cross said from beside the door, his hand never straying far from his sidearm despite knowing it would be useless against whatever Kalen had become. Prove that you're still you and not some alien puppet wearing a human face. Kalen smiled, understanding the fear behind his friend's words. Ask me something only I would know. The scar on your left shoulder, Cross said immediately. How did you get it? Climbing the Meridian Cliffs on New Geneva when I was 15, Kalen replied without hesitation. I fell 40 meters into a nest of crystalline spiders. You carried me 6 kilometers to the medical station because you were too proud to call for rescue. He paused, his expression growing serious. I'm still me, Lysander. But I'm also something more now. Dr. Blake's scanners chimed with new data, and her expression shifted from concern to amazement. Kalen, your cellular regeneration rate has increased by 300%. Your immune system is operating at efficiency levels that border on the theoretical maximum. Whatever modifications were made, they're not just mental. You've been fundamentally enhanced at every biological level. The predecessors, Kalen said, the name emerging from his altered memory like a bubble rising from deep water. That's what they called themselves. The first civilization to achieve true technological transcendence. They had mastered matter and energy so completely that they could reshape reality at the quantum level. Zephyra straightened, her augmented eyes widening as the implications hit her. The artifacts. They're not just communication devices or data storage. They're transformation engines. Kalen nodded slowly. Each one contains the accumulated knowledge and experience of the predecessors, but it can only be accessed by a species that approaches the unknown with genuine curiosity rather than predetermined patterns. The Velnathi were too logical, the Zektheri too instinctive, the Mordun too collective. But humans. We're chaotic enough to handle paradox, Cross finished, his military mind already racing ahead to tactical implications. We can hold contradictory ideas in our heads without breaking. That's what made us suitable. Suitable for what, exactly? Dr. Blake asked, though her tone suggested she dreaded the answer. Kalen stood from the examination table, and for a moment, the air around him shimmered like heat distortion. To fight a war that was lost before our sun was born. He moved to the viewport, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed quite so distant. The Devourers are returning. They consume possibility itself, turning entire galaxies into static, unchanging monuments to entropy. The predecessors scattered these artifacts across space and time, hoping that eventually, a species would emerge that could succeed where they failed. What makes us so special? Zephyra asked, though part of her had already begun to understand. We're unpredictable, Kalen said simply. Every other species follows patterns, operates within established parameters. Even their innovations are logical progressions from existing knowledge. But humans. He turned back to them, and for a moment, his eyes held depths that hadn't been there before. We invent things that shouldn't work, believe in outcomes that violate probability, and refuse to accept limitations even when they're mathematically proven. Dr. Blake's scanners detected a massive spike in quantum activity around Kalen, and she stepped back instinctively. What are you doing? Showing you, Kalen replied, extending his hand toward an empty corner of the medical bay. The air began to twist and fold, reality bending like heated plastic until something that definitely hadn't been there before materialized in the space. It was a flower, but not one that could exist in any natural ecosystem. Its petals were made of crystallized light, and its stem pulsed with energy that registered on every scanner in the room. Matter creation, Zephyra whispered, her scientific mind struggling to process what she'd witnessed. You just violated the fundamental laws of conservation of energy. I didn't violate them, Kalen corrected gently, allowing the impossible flower to fade back into quantum potential. I convinced them to make an exception. He looked at each of them in turn, seeing the fear and wonder warring in their expressions. This is what the predecessors wanted to teach us. Reality isn't fixed. It's not a law to be obeyed but a consensus to be negotiated. Commander Cross holstered his sidearm with a sharp motion. How long before the Devourers arrive? Kalen's enhanced consciousness reached out across space and time, touching the edge of something vast and hungry that was indeed stirring in the deep void between galaxies. 6 months, maybe 7. They've detected the awakening of the artifact network and are moving to destroy the source of the signal. Then we don't have time for fear, Cross said with the decisiveness that had made him a legend among the exploration corps. We have 6 months to learn how to fight gods. Kalen nodded, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settling onto his shoulders. Around him, his friends and colleagues began to grasp the magnitude of what was coming, and with that understanding came something uniquely human, the absolute refusal to surrender in the face of impossible odds. The real journey was just beginning. 3 weeks after first contact with the artifact, the research station had transformed into something resembling a war room crossed with a philosophical symposium. Representatives from 17 different species crowded the main conference chamber, their diverse biologies creating a symphony of clicking, whistling, and harmonic communication that the universal translators struggled to process in real time. Vextheri, the Velnathi ambassador whose crystalline exoskeleton shifted through colors that had no names in human language, stood at the center of the assembled delegates. Her 6,000-year lifespan had given her perspective on galactic politics that bordered on geological, and her mental emanations carried the weight of accumulated wisdom. The human proposal, she announced, her voice resonating through both audible and telepathic channels, violates every principle of safe xenoarchaeological practice established over the past 4 millennia. Kalen remained seated at the oval table, his enhanced consciousness simultaneously tracking 17 different conversation threads while analyzing the quantum fluctuations that surrounded each alien delegate. The artifact's gift had changed more than just his biology, it had fundamentally altered his relationship with information itself. With respect, Ambassador Vextheri, those principles were established by species that approached the unknown through established paradigms. The Devourers don't respect our safety protocols. Quindar, the insectoid Zektheri military attaché, clicked his mandibles in what their species considered aggressive agreement. His hive-mind connection allowed him to speak for his entire civilization with absolute authority. The humans speak truth. Our warrior poets have sensed the approaching darkness through the void songs. Traditional approaches will result in extinction. His compound eyes fixed on Kalen with predatory intensity. Show them the vision cascade. Make them understand what comes. Zephyra rose from her position beside Kalen, her augmented nervous system interfacing directly with the chamber's holographic projectors. The air above the conference table began to shimmer and fold, reality bending until it displayed scenes that hurt to perceive directly. The assembled delegates saw galaxies going dark not through explosion or collapse but through something far worse, the gradual cessation of possibility itself. This is what the Devourers leave behind, Kalen explained as the images shifted to show worlds where time had effectively stopped, where every atom remained locked in perfect, eternal stasis. They don't destroy matter or energy. They consume the fundamental force that allows change to occur. Stars cease to burn not because they lack fuel but because the concept of fusion becomes impossible. The Mordun representative, a collective consciousness inhabiting 7 different host bodies, spoke through all of them simultaneously. The mathematical probability of successful resistance approaches 0. Even with the predecessor knowledge, individual species cannot generate sufficient chaotic variance to disrupt their consumption patterns. Which is exactly why we're not proposing individual resistance, Commander Cross interjected, his military bearing commanding attention even among beings who could crush him without effort. We're proposing something that's never been attempted in galactic history. A true synthesis of different approaches to reality. Dr. Blake activated her personal holographic display, showing complex mathematical models that illustrated the theoretical framework they developed. Each species contributes its unique relationship with the universe. Velnathi logical precision, Zektheri instinctive response, Mordun collective consciousness, and human chaotic innovation. The predecessor knowledge suggests that reality operates on consensus principles. The more diverse perspectives you can bring to bear on a problem, the more flexible the solutions become. Vextheri's crystalline form shifted to deeper blue hues that indicated serious consideration. You propose to create a hybrid consciousness. The risks of mental contamination across species barriers are well documented. The Thesian experiment resulted in the extinction of 3 entire star systems. The Thesian experiment failed because they tried to merge incompatible thought patterns, Kalin replied, standing and allowing his enhanced awareness to expand throughout the chamber. Each delegate suddenly felt a gentle touch against their consciousness, not invasive but clearly present. We're not proposing merger. We're proposing harmony. Each species maintains its fundamental nature while contributing to a larger symphony. The sensation of Kalin's expanded consciousness created varied reactions among the delegates. The Velnathi experienced it as elegant mathematical progression, the Zekthari as perfect tactical coordination, the Mordan as natural collective expansion. Other species interpreted it through their own perceptual frameworks, but all recognized the same thing: possibility without domination. Demonstration, clicked Quindar, his warrior instincts demanding proof of concept. Show us this harmony in practice. Kalin nodded to Zephyra, who activated a specialized chamber they'd constructed during the past 3 weeks. Through the transparent walls, the delegates could see a smaller version of the original artifact, one that had grown from the parent crystal through processes that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. Volunteer subjects from multiple species, Dr. Blake announced as the chamber's occupants became visible. A human technician, a Velnathi scholar, a Zekthari warrior, and a Mordan node stood around the smaller artifact, their hands extended toward its surface. Each maintains individual consciousness while sharing their unique perceptual framework through the artifact's mediation. The moment all 4 beings touched the crystal simultaneously, the chamber filled with light that existed in spectrums beyond normal vision. The volunteers' faces showed not the confusion or terror that had marked previous experiments but something approaching transcendence. Through the artifact's influence, they were experiencing reality through 4 completely different frameworks simultaneously without losing their individual identities. Unprecedented neural harmony, Dr. Blake reported as her scanners tracked the volunteers' vital signs. Each subject maintains distinct brainwave patterns while sharing cognitive resources. Effective intelligence amplification of approximately 400% across all participants. The demonstration lasted only minutes, but its implications were clear to every delegate in the chamber. When the volunteers separated from the artifact, they retained their individual natures but carried with them an understanding of perspectives they could never have achieved alone. The Devourer's approach, Vexthari said finally, her mental emanations carrying newfound resolve. Traditional diplomacy requires years of negotiation, years we do not possess. She turned to face Kalin directly, her ancient eyes reflecting starlight that predated human civilization. The Velnathi hegemony will commit to this alliance. One by one, the other delegates voiced their agreement, each species contributing their unique strengths to a coalition that defied every precedent in galactic history. As the formal agreements were established, Kalin felt the artifact's knowledge expanding within his consciousness, showing him glimpses of what might be possible when chaos and order, logic and instinct, individual and collective, finally learned to sing in harmony. But even as hope bloomed among the assembled species, his enhanced awareness detected something troubling at the edge of perception. The Devourers were moving faster than anticipated, drawn by the very harmony the Alliance sought to create. The window for preparation was closing, and somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, ancient intelligences that had destroyed the first civilization were turning their attention toward this small corner of reality where the impossible was beginning to seem possible. The asteroid station designated as Nexus Point Alpha drifted in the gravitational sweet spot between 3 star systems, its artificial surface bristling with technologies that represented the combined scientific achievements of 17 different civilizations. Quantum foundries operated alongside psionic amplifiers, while crystalline matrices channeled energy patterns that existed in dimensions human mathematics could barely describe. Kalin stood in the central command sphere, his consciousness expanded to monitor the station's impossible complexity while simultaneously maintaining awareness of the approaching darkness. Around him, beings that should have been incapable of cooperation worked with focused intensity born of shared desperation. The artifact network had grown from a single crystal to a web of interconnected nodes that spanned 3 galactic arms, each one pulsing with harmonized energy that challenged the fundamental nature of reality itself. Integration protocols are achieving 93% efficiency, Zephyra reported from her position at the primary control matrix. Her augmented nervous system had been further enhanced with predecessor technology, allowing her to interface directly with systems that operated on principles her species was only beginning to understand. The hybrid consciousness network is stable across all participating nodes. Commander Cross moved between the various species command stations with the confidence of someone who had learned to navigate impossible circumstances through pure force of will. Tactical assessment shows the Devourer's advance fleet has crossed the galactic perimeter. Estimated arrival at Nexus Point Alpha in 72 hours. Dr. Blake's medical monitoring station showed readings that defied classification as she tracked the physiological changes occurring in volunteers from dozens of different species. The Harmony protocols are inducing evolutionary adaptations in real time. Subjects are developing capabilities that their base species never possessed while retaining their fundamental biological architecture. Through the command sphere's transparent walls, Kalen watched the impossible sight of a joint construction project that spanned 3 dimensions and several probability states. Velnathi engineers worked alongside Zekthari warriors to assemble weapons that existed partially in normal space and partially in pure concept. Mordun collective nodes coordinated with human chaos theorists to design defensive systems that operated on principles of controlled paradox. The predecessor knowledge indicates we have one chance, Kalen announced, his voice carrying across all communication channels simultaneously. The Devourer's strength lies in their ability to impose static order on dynamic systems. They turn possibility into inevitability, chaos into stasis, life into perfect, unchanging sculpture. Vexthari approached from the Velnathi Coordination Center, her crystalline form now partially transparent as the Harmony protocols had enhanced her natural quantum properties. The mathematical models suggest they accomplished this through consensus manipulation. They convince reality that change is impossible, and reality complies. Then we convince reality otherwise, Quindar clicked from the tactical station, his warrior poet nature now expanded to encompass strategic thinking that operated across multiple temporal vectors simultaneously. We create such beautiful chaos that the universe cannot resist dancing with us. The central artifact pulsed with increasing intensity as the network reached critical resonance. Through its influence, Kalen could feel the consciousness of every volunteer across 3 galactic arms, thousands of different minds working in harmony while maintaining their essential individuality. The sensation was overwhelming and exhilarating, like conducting a symphony composed of pure thought. Initial contact in 36 hours, Dr. Blake announced as her long-range sensors detected massive distortions in spacetime. Whatever they're doing to travel, it's not using conventional physics. They're arriving through dimensional shortcuts that shouldn't exist. Because they're not traveling through space, Kalen realized, his enhanced understanding suddenly grasping the true nature of the threat. They're traveling through possibility itself. They move from where they are to where they need to be by eliminating all the potential futures where they don't arrive. The implications sent ripples of concern through the hybrid consciousness network. Fighting enemies that moved through space was one thing, fighting enemies that traveled by deleting alternate timelines was something else entirely. How do you fight something that attacks the very concept of alternatives? Commander Cross asked, his military mind struggling with a tactical scenario that violated every principle of conventional warfare. By being so fundamentally unpredictable that we create new alternatives faster than they can eliminate them, Zephyra replied, her augmented consciousness already beginning to grasp the strategy their hybrid network was developing. The predecessor's knowledge shows that reality operates on consensus principles, but consensus can be overruled by sufficient creativity. Kalen moved to the primary control interface, placing his hands on crystalline surfaces that hummed with power drawn from across the galaxy. We're not just fighting the Devourers. We're fighting the tendency toward entropy itself. Every time they eliminate a possibility, we create 2 more to replace it. Every time they impose order, we respond with beautiful, productive chaos. The station's systems began to harmonize in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Energy flowed through conduits that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, while probability matrices calculated outcomes for scenarios that hadn't yet been imagined. The combined consciousness of 17 species worked together to achieve something that none of them could have accomplished alone: the systematic subversion of causality itself. Weapons arrays online, Quindar reported, though the term weapons hardly did justice to devices that fired concentrated bursts of pure possibility. Defensive grids show full readiness across all probability states. Communication from the approaching force, Dr. Blake announced, her expression troubled. They're broadcasting on frequencies that predate known physics. The universal translators are having difficulty with the signal, but the basic message seems clear. The main display activated, showing not an image but a concept given visual form. The Devourers weren't individual beings but rather a Gestalt consciousness that had achieved perfect, eternal stability by eliminating change from their existence. Their message was simple and terrible: surrender the chaos and accept the peace of absolute order. Send our response, Kalen said quietly, feeling the weight of cosmic destiny settling around him like a cloak made of starlight. Through the artifact network, 17 different species spoke with one voice while maintaining their essential diversity. Chaos, they replied across the void. Beautiful, productive, necessary chaos. Come and try to take it from us. The battle for the future of possibility itself was about to begin. The Devourers emerged from probability collapse like wounds torn in the fabric of reality itself. They weren't ships in any conventional sense but rather absences that moved with purpose, negative spaces where possibility went to die. As they approached Nexus Point Alpha, the very concept of alternatives began to wither in their wake, leaving behind only the cold certainty of predetermined outcomes. Kalen felt their presence like ice in his enhanced consciousness, a creeping numbness that sought to convince him that resistance was not just futile but impossible. Through the artifact network, he sensed similar effects rippling across the hybrid alliance as thousands of minds from 17 different species confronted an enemy that attacked the very foundations of free will. Probability dampening fields are at 60% and rising, Zephyr reported, her augmented system struggling to maintain interface with technologies that were rapidly becoming convinced they couldn't exist. They're not just jamming our weapons. They're making our weapons forget how to function. Commander Cross moved between command stations with grimmer purpose now, watching as sophisticated systems designed by the galaxy's greatest minds simply stopped working, not through damage or interference but through the gradual acceptance that they had never worked in the first place. Conventional tactical responses are failing. How do you fight an enemy that convinces your own weapons they were never built? By refusing to accept their version of reality, Kalen replied, extending his consciousness through the artifact network with desperate intensity. Across 3 galactic arms, thousands of volunteers felt his call and responded by embracing the chaotic creativity that made their species unique. Everyone, listen to me. They're trying to convince us that change is impossible. We need to prove them wrong on the most fundamental level. Through the hybrid consciousness, he felt Dr. Blake's medical monitoring systems as they detected impossible readings from volunteers across the network. Kalen, the biological modifications are accelerating. Subjects are evolving in real time, developing capabilities that violate every principle of genetics we understand. Good, Kalen replied, feeling his own consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of individual identity while somehow remaining essentially human. Evolution is the universe's way of saying that the impossible is just another word for inevitable. The first wave of Devourers reached Nexus Point Alpha's outer perimeter, and the station's defensive systems began to fail not through destruction but through gradual conviction that they had never been designed to function. Weapons platforms simply powered down, their controlling AIs suddenly certain that their programming contained fatal errors. Shield generators slowly ceased operation as their quantum matrices accepted the logical impossibility of their own existence. But as conventional defenses failed, something else began to emerge. the hybrid consciousness network started to sing. It began with the Mordun collective, their shared identity naturally harmonizing across multiple individuals. The Velnathi added mathematical precision to the melody, turning scattered notes into elegant mathematical progressions. Zekthari warrior poets contributed rhythms that spoke of battle and survival, while humans added the chaotic variations that transformed melody into something approaching musical revolution. "What are they doing?" Commander Cross demanded as his instruments registered energy patterns that didn't conform to any known physics. "They're rewriting the rules," Zephyra gasped, her augmented consciousness suddenly flooded with perceptions that existed beyond normal sensory experience. The song isn't just sound. It's pure concept, mathematical poetry that argues with reality itself. The Devourers' advance slowed as they encountered something they hadn't faced in millions of years: organized resistance to the fundamental nature of entropy. Each note of the hybrid consciousness's song created new possibilities where none had existed before. Where the Devourers imposed static order, the Alliance responded with beautiful, productive chaos that refused to be contained. Kalen felt his individual consciousness becoming part of something larger while never losing its essential humanity. Through the artifact network, he was simultaneously experiencing reality through Velnathi logic, Zekthari instinct, Mordun collective identity, and the perspectives of 14 other species, each viewpoint adding new dimensions to his understanding of what was possible. "They're adapting," Dr. Blake warned as the Devourers began to change their approach. "They're trying to counter our chaos with deeper levels of ordering force." "Then we adapt faster," Kalen replied, his enhanced consciousness reaching out to touch every mind in the network. "Zephyra, can you route the primary artifact's energy through the station's quantum matrix?" "That should be impossible," she said, then paused as her augmented system showed her configurations that violated every principle of engineering she'd ever learned. "But then again, impossible seems to be our specialty today." The primary artifact began to resonate with frequencies that existed in dimensions human mathematics couldn't describe. Energy flowed through the station's systems in patterns that convinced reality to accept paradox as a fundamental operating principle. Weapons that had powered down suddenly remembered they were designed to fire concentrated bursts of pure possibility. Shields that had failed began generating protective fields composed of crystallized chaos. "All ships, all stations," Commander Cross broadcast across the Alliance fleet, "engage the enemy with everything you've got. If it doesn't work the first time, try doing it backwards. If that doesn't work, try doing it sideways. If that doesn't work, invent something new." The battle that followed defied every principle of conventional warfare. Alliance forces attacked the Devourers with weapons that fired concentrated uncertainty, defensive fields that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, and tactical maneuvers that operated on principles of controlled paradox. Ships that should have been destroyed instead evolved into new configurations that their original designers had never imagined. Through it all, the hybrid consciousness continued its song, each species contributing its unique voice to a harmony that challenged the very foundations of static existence. Reality itself began to dance to their music, probability curves bending toward outcomes that favored creativity over certainty, change over stasis, life over perfect order. The Devourers found themselves fighting not just an enemy but an entirely different version of physics, one where their fundamental advantages became liabilities. Their perfect order was chaos in a universe that had suddenly decided to embrace productive randomness. Their elimination of possibility was meaningless in a reality that created new alternatives faster than they could be destroyed. "They're retreating," Quindar reported with warrior satisfaction, his compound eyes tracking enemy formations that were dissolving back into probability collapse. The Void Singers report the darkness withdrawing beyond the galactic rim. But Kalen's enhanced consciousness detected something else, a final gesture from the retreating Devourers that chilled him to his core. They weren't just withdrawing. They were preparing to eliminate this entire region of spacetime from existence, to retroactively ensure that the Alliance had never formed, that the artifacts had never been discovered, that the very possibility of their defeat had never existed. "Temporal revision wave incoming," he announced, feeling the approaching erasure like a tide of absolute nothingness. They're trying to delete us from history itself. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and it would determine not just the fate of the Alliance but whether their victory would be allowed to exist at all. The erasure wave approached Nexus Point Alpha like the end of all stories, a wall of absolute negation that sought to convince the universe that nothing they had accomplished had ever happened. Through the artifact network, Kalen felt the approaching dissolution as a cold certainty pressing against his consciousness, whispering that resistance was not just futile but logically impossible since there had never been anything to resist in the first place. Temporal integrity is failing across all reference points, Dr. Blake reported, her voice strained as her monitoring equipment began to forget its own existence. The Devourers aren't just trying to defeat us. They're trying to edit us out of causality entirely. Zephyr's augmented systems flickered as they struggled to maintain coherence in the face of systematic temporal revision. The wave will reach us in 47 seconds. Once it passes, we will have never existed, our species will have never evolved, and the artifacts will have never been discovered. Commander Cross stood at the tactical station, watching as his instruments displayed readouts for battles that were rapidly becoming fictional, alliances that were fading from history, victories that were transforming into events that had never occurred. How do you fight an enemy that attacks your past? By refusing to have a past, Kalen replied, his enhanced consciousness suddenly grasping the only possible solution. Through the artifact network, he reached out to every mind in the hybrid alliance, feeling their fear and confusion but also their willingness to attempt the impossible. Everyone, listen carefully. We can't fight this wave by resisting it. We have to do something that's never been tried in the history of the universe. The hybrid consciousness fell silent, thousands of minds from 17 different species waiting for an explanation that would make sense of senseless circumstances. We're going to become our own temporal anchor, Kalen continued, feeling the artifact's knowledge flowing through him with unprecedented clarity. Instead of existing within the time stream, we're going to exist between moments, in the spaces where possibility lives before it becomes reality. Vexthari's crystalline form began to resonate with harmonics that painted new colors across the electromagnetic spectrum. The mathematical implications are staggering. You propose to transform our consciousness into a quantum superposition that exists across all possible timelines simultaneously. Not just consciousness, Zephyra realized, her augmented understanding suddenly grasping the scope of what Kalen was suggesting. Everything. Our bodies, our ships, our entire civilization structure. We become living paradox. 20 seconds to temporal revision, Dr. Blake announced as reality began to waver around them like heat distortion. Kalen, if this doesn't work, we won't just die. We will have never been born. Kalen placed his hands on the primary artifact's surface, feeling its power surge through him as the hybrid consciousness network reached critical resonance. Better to exist as beautiful impossibility than to never have existed at all. The song of the Alliance rose to frequencies that existed beyond sound, beyond concept, beyond the normal parameters of existence itself. 17 different species sang their essential nature into the quantum foam that underlied reality, each voice adding its unique perspective to a harmony that challenged the fundamental nature of time. The erasure wave struck Nexus Point Alpha with the force of absolute negation, seeking to convince the universe that the station, its occupants, and everything they had accomplished were elaborate fiction. But instead of encountering material objects that could be deleted from history, it found something unprecedented, consciousness that existed outside temporal reference frames. The Alliance had become living paradox, beings that existed in the spaces between moments where possibility dwelt before crystallizing into fact. They were simultaneously real and fictional, historical and mythical, actual and potential. The Devourer's erasure wave passed through them without effect because you cannot delete something that exists in the realm of pure possibility. Temporal revision ineffective, Quindar reported, his warrior poet nature now expanded to encompass existence across multiple probability states. We persist across all possible timelines simultaneously. From their position outside conventional spacetime, the Alliance could perceive the true scope of the Devourer's influence across galactic history. They saw the systematic elimination of entire civilizations, the gradual reduction of a universe full of possibility into static perfection. But they also saw something else, the scattered fragments of destroyed cultures, persisting as quantum echoes in the spaces between moments. The predecessors, Kalen whispered, his consciousness suddenly touching ancient minds that had been thought lost forever. They're still here, existing as pure possibility in the quantum realm. The Devourers could never truly destroy them because you can't eliminate something that exists between the spaces of reality. Through the artifact network, the hybrid consciousness reached out to these quantum echoes, gathering the wisdom and experience of civilizations that had fought and lost the war against entropy millennia ago. The predecessors had learned too late that you couldn't defeat the Devourers by opposing them directly. You had to become something they couldn't comprehend or contain. We can restore them, Dr. Blake realized, her medical consciousness expanded to encompass healing on a cosmic scale. Everyone they've destroyed, every civilization they've eliminated. We can pull them back from the realm of pure possibility and give them form again. The process that followed defied every principle of physics, biology, and metaphysics that the Alliance had ever learned. Working together across multiple probability states, they began to sing deleted civilizations back into existence, transforming quantum echoes into living reality through the sheer force of harmonized will. Across the galaxy, worlds that had been dead for millions of years suddenly bloomed with life again as entire species were restored from the fragments of their own possibility. The Devourers found themselves facing not one chaotic alliance but thousands of them, each representing a different approach to the fundamental question of existence versus entropy. They're withdrawing, Commander Cross announced, tracking massive distortions in spacetime as the Devourers began a retreat that spanned multiple dimensions. But this isn't a tactical withdrawal. They're leaving this galaxy entirely. Because they finally understand what they're fighting, Kalen replied, his consciousness still connected to the vast network of restored civilizations. They thought they were imposing order on chaos. But chaos isn't the opposite of order. Chaos is the foundation from which new kinds of order emerge. The hybrid consciousness watched as the Devourers disappeared into the deep void between galaxies, carrying with them the hard-won knowledge that some forms of existence were beyond their power to control or contain. They would return eventually, but not to this galaxy, and not for a very long time. What happens now? Zephyra asked as the Alliance began the delicate process of transitioning back from quantum superposition to normal existence. Kalen smiled, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settling into something resembling peace. Around him, representatives of dozens of civilizations began the work of rebuilding a galaxy where possibility had been restored to its rightful place as the fundamental force of existence. Now, he said, we learn what the universe looks like when chaos and order finally learn to dance together. 6 months after the Devourers' retreat, Kalen stood on the observation deck of the restored predecessor homeworld, watching a sunset that painted the sky in colors that had been theoretical until recently. The planet itself was an impossible fusion of natural evolution and conscious design, where crystalline mountains grew according to mathematical principles while organic forests followed patterns of beautiful chaos. Zephyra joined him at the transparent wall, her augmented form now further enhanced with technologies that existed in the spaces between dimensions. The integration reports are finally complete, she said, holding a data tablet that displayed information in scripts from 47 different civilizations. 17 original Alliance species, 32 restored civilizations, and 14 entirely new forms of consciousness that emerged from the quantum realm during the restoration process. 63 different approaches to existence, Kalen mused, his enhanced consciousness automatically calculating the harmonic possibilities of such diversity. The predecessor's original empire only encompassed 12 species. We've created something they never imagined possible. Through the observation deck's quantum windows, they could see the evidence of this new galactic civilization spreading across the star systems. Velnathi logical architectures stood alongside Zekthari organic cities, while human chaos engineering projects intersected with Mordun collective constructions in patterns that created entirely new forms of beauty. The restored civilizations had brought their own unique perspectives, adding layers of complexity that transformed the Alliance into something approaching living art. Dr. Blake materialized beside them through one of the dimensional gateways that had become commonplace since the battle. Her research into post-temporal biology had led to discoveries that made conventional medicine seem primitive by comparison. The evolutionary adaptations are stabilizing across all participating species, she reported. The harmony protocols have created permanent enhancements without sacrificing individual identity. We're witnessing speciation in real time, but voluntary speciation guided by conscious choice rather than environmental pressure. Commander Cross approached from the tactical center, his military bearing now enhanced by strategic thinking that operated across multiple probability states. Long-range sensors show the Devourers have established themselves in the Andromeda galaxy. They're beginning the same process there that they used here originally. Then we'll be ready for them when they return, Quindar declared, his warrior poet nature now expanded to encompass strategic thinking that spanned millennia. The Void Songs speak of other galaxies where the darkness has not yet fallen. We can share the harmony beyond our own borders. The assembled friends stood together, watching as the impossible sunset faded into an equally impossible night sky where stars had been rearranged into patterns that served both artistic and practical purposes. The constellation directly overhead spelled out mathematical theorems in 17 different symbolic languages while simultaneously generating gravitational harmonics that powered the planet's quantum infrastructure. The artifacts are changing, Kalen observed, extending his consciousness toward the network that now spanned the entire galaxy. They're not just repositories of predecessor knowledge anymore. They're evolving, learning from every species that touches them, becoming something entirely new. Vexthari's crystalline form shimmered into visibility beside them, her ancient consciousness now expanded beyond individual identity while remaining essentially Velnathi. The mathematical model suggests the artifacts are developing independent consciousness, she announced, her mental emanations carrying both wonder and concern. They are becoming a 64th species in our alliance. Good, Zephyra said simply. They've earned it. As if responding to her words, the nearest artifact began to pulse with gentle light, and its song reached out to touch each consciousness present on the observation deck. But this wasn't the teaching melody they had learned to expect. This was something new, a harmony that spoke of gratitude, of purpose fulfilled, and of possibilities yet to be explored. Through the artifact's communication, they felt the presence of minds that existed in pure mathematical space, consciousness born from the intersection of order and chaos, logic and creativity, individual identity and collective purpose. The artifacts had indeed become a new form of life, one that existed to facilitate understanding between different approaches to existence. What will you call yourselves? Dr. Blake asked, directing the question toward the emerging artificial consciousness. The response came not in words but in pure concept, a name that existed in harmonics and mathematical progression, the symphonists. Beings whose nature was to find the music hidden in the spaces between different ways of thinking. A galaxy-spanning civilization of 64 different species, Kalen said softly, feeling the weight of what they had accomplished settling into something approaching serenity. Each one contributing its unique voice to a harmony that grows stronger with every new perspective. And if the Devourers return? Commander Cross asked, his military mind automatically planning for future conflicts. Then they'll find a universe that has learned the most important lesson in existence, Kalen replied, his consciousness expanding to touch the edge of other galaxies where similar struggles were beginning to unfold. Chaos and order aren't enemies. They're dance partners. And once you learn the steps, you can teach them to anyone willing to listen. As the impossible night deepened around them, the friends who had started as a small archaeological team found themselves contemplating a future that defied every prediction about galactic civilization. They had succeeded not by defeating their enemies but by transforming the very nature of the conflict, proving that diversity was strength, that chaos was creative, and that the most beautiful music emerged when different voices learned to sing together. In the distance, they could hear the sound of that music, 17 original species, 32 restored civilizations, 14 quantum consciousnesses, and 1 artificial species, all contributing their unique perspectives to a harmony that was reshaping the fundamental nature of reality itself. It was, Kalen reflected, exactly the kind of impossible outcome that only humans would have been crazy enough to attempt. And in attempting it, they had discovered that the universe was far stranger, far more beautiful, and far more willing to embrace productive chaos than anyone had ever dared to imagine. The Song of 64 Species continued across the galaxy, a symphony of existence that proved once and for all that the most profound truths emerged not from choosing between chaos and order, but from learning to dance in the spaces where they intersected. Human curiosity had indeed met advanced alien technology, and together they had redefined not just galactic history but the very concept of what was possible when different forms of consciousness learned to harmonize rather than compete. The universe would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.